November 5, 1943. Torquemada Point, Bougainville. 27 hours. That's how long PFC Samuel Miller had been a part of the swamp. The mud had long since seeped through his uniform, a cold, clammy second skin. The air was a solid thing, thick with the sweet, cloying stench of rot and the electric tang of impending rain. Mosquitoes formed a vibrating cloud around his head, their whine a constant high-pitched drill in his ears. One landed on the pale skin of his neck, just below his helmet line, and began to feed. He didn't twitch. He didn't blink. He had become a fixture, a log, a stone. He was, for all intents and purposes, invisible. His world had narrowed to a circle of polished glass. The inertial 8X telescopic sight was his only window, and through it, he studied a patch of jungle 400 yards away. It was a tapestry of 1,000 shades of green, of tangled vines and the grotesque, sprawling roots of a banyan tree. And there, nestled in a fork where two limbs met, was a shadow that didn't belong. A subtle, angular break in the organic flow of the tree. The Japanese sniper was a master of his craft, wrapped in foliage, his rifle sheathed in burlap. But he had made one mistake. An hour ago, a tiny glint, the briefest reflection off his rifle's aperture sight, had betrayed him. Samuel's breathing was shallow, a barely perceptible movement. His left hand cradled the forestock of his M1903A4 Springfield, the mail-order rifle his squad had mocked so mercilessly. The stock was cool and familiar against his cheek. His right index finger rested on the trigger, taking up the slack, a breath away from breaking the shot. He calculated everything for the 1,000th time. The humidity that thickened the air and slowed the bullet. The slight, persistent breeze from the coast, moving left to right at about 3 miles per hour. He adjusted the crosshairs a fraction, aiming not at the center of the shadow, but at a point just left of where he knew the man's chest would be, allowing the wind to do its work. The symphony of the jungle had returned to normal. Birds chirped. Insects buzzed. The sniper, believing himself safe, was beginning to move again. Samuel saw a slight shift in the foliage, adjustment of the rifle barrel. He was acquiring a new target. He's aiming at my guys, Samuel thought, his blood running cold. The company was advancing slowly, blindly, through the kunai grass to his rear. This was it. No more waiting. He filled his lungs once, let half the air out, and held it. The world ceased to exist. There was no swamp, no stench, no fear. There was only the crosshair, the target, and the space between them. His finger applied the final, steady, increasing pressure. Crack. The sound of the shot was impossibly loud, violating the jungle's humidity. It was a sharp, singular declaration of violence. But in the infinitesimal slice of time as the hammer fell, another sound tore through the moment. Directly behind him. Not 20 yards away. A twig snapping. It wasn't the dry pop of a falling branch. It was the wet, deliberate crunch of something, or someone, putting their weight on it. The shot was already gone, the bullet irreversibly committed to its path. But Samuel's heart froze solid in his chest. His body went rigid. Had his shot hit its mark? Had he just saved his comrades, or had he just signed his own death warrant? He was completely exposed, isolated in his hide, and he was no longer alone. Before we continue this unbelievable story of the soldier they called the Oklahoma Ghost, make sure to subscribe. This channel is dedicated to bringing you the lost, untold stories of WWII's most incredible moments, and you won't want to miss what happens next. The hunt is just beginning. 3 weeks earlier, the world was not green, but a monotonous, oppressive blue. The troop transport ship USS Warhawk cut through the swells of the South Pacific, a steel island laden with the nervous energy of 5,000 men. Below decks, in a compartment thick with the smells of diesel, sweat, and stale coffee, Samuel Miller was committing what his squad considered a cardinal sin. He was caring for his rifle. The air was a physical presence, hot and heavy with humidity. The ship's engines provided a constant, deep-throated vibration that traveled up through the deck plates and into the bones. Samuel sat on his bunk, a small island of focused tranquility amidst the chaos of a card game and the low hum of anxious conversation. A worn, oil-stained cloth moved with methodical precision over the bolt of his M1903A4 Springfield. The metal, freshly cleaned with Hoppe's No. 9 solvent, gave off a sharp, chemical scent that cut through the compartment's funk, a smell that, to Samuel, meant order. "Will you look at Professor Miller?" a voice sneered. PFC Joe Petrelli from Brooklyn leaned against a bulkhead, a smirk plastered on his face. "Still polishin' your huntin' rifle, Okie? You think Tojo's gonna wait for you to get a perfect sight picture?" A ripple of laughter went through the men nearby. One of them, Corporal Jenkins, hefted his own M1 Garand. The action clattered with a solid, metallic authority. "See this, Miller? This is an army rifle. It goes ping when it's done and tells you it's time for more. That thing," he gestured dismissively at Samuel's Springfield, "that's a relic. A mail-order relic." The mockery was a daily ritual. The rifle, ordered from a specialized shop back in the States, had arrived in a long, wooden crate that immediately marked him as an outsider. The unertl scope, mounted on its sleek rails, was their favorite target. "You gonna count the freckles on the Japs before you shoot?" Petrelli jeered. "Or you just gonna write him a strongly worded letter?" Samuel didn't look up. He continued his work, sliding the bolt back into the receiver with a smooth, satisfying clunk. The weight of the rifle was perfect in his hands, balanced, purposeful. It wasn't loud or boastful. It was an instrument of precision. He stored their words away, not with anger, but with a cold, distant focus. They were noise. The rifle was signal. His eyes flicked up once, meeting the gaze of Sergeant Hank, Pappy, Dalton. The sergeant was an old breed, his face a road map of wrinkles earned under a harsher sun than Bougainville's. He was cleaning his own M1, but his movements were slow, economical. He watched the exchange, his expression unreadable. He didn't join the mockery, but he didn't stop it either. He was assessing, as he always did. Samuel looked away, back to his rifle. He adjusted the tension on the scope mount, a tiny, precise calibration. He thought of the red dirt of Oklahoma, of his grandfather's voice. "The wind ain't your enemy. It's your teacher." These men didn't understand the wind. They only understood the storm. Petrelli opened his mouth to launch another verbal volley, but the sound that came out was drowned by a sudden, deafening shriek that tore through the entire ship. It was the bosun's whistle, followed immediately by the ship's intercom, blaring with a metallic urgency that froze the blood in every man's veins. "General quarters. General quarters. All hands man your battle stations." The card game evaporated. The laughter died in Petrelli's throat. The compartment exploded into a chaos of frantic motion. Men scrambled for helmets, for life jackets, for rifles. The theoretical war had just become terrifyingly real. Samuel's hands moved automatically. He didn't rush. He slid the bolt home on a full 5-round stripper clip, his movements sure and steady. He slung the mail-order rifle over his shoulder, the weight a familiar comfort. Then the world outside erupted. A geyser of white water, tall as a building, erupted 100 yards off the starboard side. The concussion wave hit the hull like a giant's fist. The ship shuddered violently. Then another, closer. The deep, throaty boom of coastal defense guns rolled across the water. They were still miles from the shore. The jungle was a dark, menacing line on the horizon, and death was already reaching out for them, trying to pluck them from the sea before they even set foot on the hell that awaited. The beach was not sand. It was a coarse, black volcanic grit that stuck to everything: their boots, their uniforms, the sweat on their faces. The air, still thick with the acrid smoke of naval bombardment, tasted of ash and salt. And beyond the beach, the jungle waited. It was a solid, impenetrable wall of green, a living entity that seemed to swallow the light and sound, radiating a humid, malevolent breath. For 2 days, Samuel's squad had pushed inland with the rest of the company, following a narrow, muddy track that the Marines had carved out. The war was a disjointed series of terrifying sounds. The distant crump of mortars. The sporadic crackle of rifle fire from somewhere up ahead. But they saw no enemy. Only the jungle. The mockingbirds from the ship were silent now, their bravado replaced by a tense, watchful anxiety. Every rustle in the undergrowth was a potential threat. Every shadow held a sniper. The rain started on the third morning, a relentless warm downpour that turned the track into a sucking, knee-deep river of mud. It poured from the brims of their helmets, soaked through their packs, and made the wood and metal of their rifles slick and heavy. The sound of the rain was a constant, hissing roar, drowning out all but the closest noises. They were moving in a single file, Sergeant Dalton at the point, Samuel somewhere in the middle, when the world exploded. It didn't start with a bang, but with a sound. A rapid, metallic thump-thump-thump-thump that was entirely different from the sharper report of their M1S. It was the Japanese Type 92 heavy machine gun, the one the veterans called the woodpecker. Its rhythm was deceptively slow, methodical, and utterly terrifying. The first burst shredded the leaves above their heads, raining down green confetti and splinters of wood. A man screamed, clutching his arm as a round tore through it. "Contact! Front!" Dalton roared, his voice cracking with urgency. "Get down! Find cover!" The squad scattered, diving into the mud, behind the pathetic cover of fallen logs and the thick, buttressed roots of jungle trees. Samuel pressed himself into the muck, the cold ooze seeping into his uniform. He could hear the bullets snapping past, their sound a vicious crack as they broke the sound barrier inches from his helmet. Another man cried out, this time a guttural, choking sound that was cut off too quickly. "Where is it? God damn it, where is it?" Petrelli yelled, firing his Garand blindly into the green wall. The loud ping of his ejecting clip was a dinner bell for death. Samuel forced his breathing to slow. He ignored the panic, the mud, the rain stinging his eyes. This was different from the ship, different from the ridicule. This was the reality his grandfather had never had to teach him. He raised his head just enough to peer through the dense foliage. His eyes, trained for a lifetime to pick out anomalies in a landscape, scanned the jungle ahead. The machine gun fire came from a slight rise, about 200 yards out. But the foliage was too thick. There was no muzzle flash, no movement. Then he saw it. A flicker. Not from the ground, but from the trees. High up, in a canopy of interwoven branches, a slight, almost imperceptible movement. A platform. A sniper, spotting for the machine gun nest, guiding its fire. "Sergeant!" Samuel hissed, his voice low but cutting through the din. "Up. In the canopy. 2 o'clock. Sniper in the banyan tree." Dalton, crouched behind a log, risked a glance. "I don't see a damn thing, Miller." "He's there," Samuel insisted, his voice flat and certain. "The machine gun is at the base of the same rise. They're linked." Another burst from the woodpecker chewed up the log Dalton was behind, sending splinters flying. The suppressive fire was pinning them perfectly. They were fish in a barrel. Standard rifle charges were suicide in this terrain. They were being methodically dismantled by an enemy they couldn't even see. Dalton looked back at his squad. Jenkins was bleeding from the head. 2 other men were down, moaning. The medic was pinned, unable to move. He looked at the green hell spitting death at them. Then his eyes, wide with desperation and a dawning grim realization, locked onto Samuel. They fell upon the unique, scoped rifle slung across his back. "Miller," Dalton barked, his voice hoarse. "That fancy scope of yours. You think you can actually use it?" The weight of the entire squad's survival, the lives of the moaning men in the mud, shifted and settled squarely onto Samuel's shoulders. The mail-order rifle was no longer a joke. It was their only chance. For a heartbeat, The world narrowed to the space between Samuel's eye and the scope. The rain, the mud, the screams, the terrifying thump-thump-thump of the woodpecker, it all faded into a dull, distant roar. There was only the crosshair, the patch of green canopy 200 yards away, and the faint, almost spectral outline of a man nestled in the trees. The mockery echoed in his mind, but it was a ghost now, without power. Mail order nonsense. A spyglass. A hunting rifle. The words were just noise. The rifle in his hands was cold, hard reality. Petrelli. Samuel's voice was low, but it carried a new, unshakable authority. Spot for me. Left to right wind, 3 miles per. Humidity is maxed. Petrelli, his face pale beneath the grime, stared at him for a second, stunned. The dynamic had shifted irrevocably. The mocked Okie was now giving orders. He fumbled for his binoculars, his hands shaking. I don't see him, Miller. He's there. Watch for the flash. Samuel's body was a statue. He had wriggled into a stable prone position, his elbows dug into the soft earth. The stock of the M1903 was a solid anchor against his shoulder. He inhaled slowly, the smell of wet wool and his own fear filling his nostrils. He let half the breath out and held it. The crosshairs drifted, steadied, and settled on the center of the shadowy form. The Japanese sniper chose that moment to fire. A tiny, almost insignificant muzzle flash, like a lit match being struck and immediately cupped in a hand, winked from the canopy. The crack of the Arisaka rifle was sharp and distinct, followed by a cry from the American lines. That was all Samuel needed. His finger completed the squeeze. It wasn't a jerk. It was a smooth, increasing pressure that culminated in a surprise. Crack. The report of the .30-06 round leaving his Springfield was different from everything else on the battlefield. It wasn't the blast of a Garand or the hammering of the machine gun. It was a singular, cleaving sound, sharp and final, like a tree splitting in a silent forest. Through the scope, he saw the impact. A puff of dark material, fabric, bark, something else, exploded from the sniper's position. The shadowy form jerked violently, then slumped, becoming a limp, indistinct shape amidst the greenery. A long, dark object, the sniper's rifle, tumbled from the branches, clattering through the leaves before thudding to the jungle floor below. A stunned silence fell over the squad. It lasted only a second, but it was profound. The only sound was the rain and the woodpecker, which continued its methodical fire. "Holy hell," Petrelli whispered, his binoculars glued to the spot. "You got him. You actually got the son of a bitch." Samuel was already moving. The bolt handle was cool under his palm. He jerked it up and back in a single, fluid motion. The spent brass cartridge spun through the air, gleaming dully, and landed in the mud with a soft plink. He slammed the bolt forward and down, chambering a fresh round. The smell of cordite, sharp and clean, filled his nostrils, the smell of a promise kept. "The machine gun," Samuel said, his voice still eerily calm. "Base of the rise. See the ferns moving? Left of the red-flowered bush." He shifted his position slightly, the wet fabric of his uniform scraping against the earth. The inertial scope swept across the jungle floor. He found the disturbance in the ferns, the cleverly camouflaged muzzle of the Type 92 as it traversed for another burst. He couldn't see the gunner, only the weapon. He didn't need to see the man. He needed to silence the gun. He adjusted his aim, calculating the angle. He aimed for the center of the weapon's barrel shroud, a fraction of an inch above the ferns. Another breath. Another slow, steady squeeze. Crack. The round hit with a metallic spang. The machine gun's rhythm stuttered. A shout of surprise and pain echoed from the nest. The weapon fell silent. The suppression was over. For a full 3 seconds, there was nothing but the sound of the rain. Then Sergeant Dalton's voice roared, "Advance! Now! Go, go, go!" The squad erupted from their cover, charging forward through the mud, their garrons now barking at the revealed position. The spell was broken. The momentum was theirs. Samuel allowed himself a single, shallow breath. He started to rise, ready to move up with the squad. But as his weight shifted, a geyser of mud and rotting vegetation erupted 6 inches from his face, stinging his skin with its impact. The sound of the shot reached him a split second later. A sharp, high-pitched crack, different from the first sniper's rifle. It came from a different direction. From the left. Higher up. He dropped back into the muck, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was exposed. The charge continued ahead of him, but he was frozen. He slowly turned his head, his eyes scanning the new sector of jungle. There, deeper in, better concealed. Another shadow. Another set of patient, hate-filled eyes looking back at him. The first kill had been a necessity. This was a message. The hunt had become personal. The rain had softened to a persistent drizzle, but the jungle steamed, a great, sweating beast breathing its humidity back into the sky. The brief, brutal firefight was over. The machine gun nest had been silenced with grenades and point-blank rifle fire. The 2 wounded men were being carried back to the aid station on makeshift litters, their moans a haunting counterpoint to the sudden quiet. The cost of their advance was etched on the faces of the surviving men, 2 dead, 3 wounded. Samuel sat apart, his back against the massive root of a kapok tree, methodically running a cleaning rod down the barrel of his Springfield. The familiar ritual was a bomb. The smell of Hoppa's No. 9 and the faint, coppery scent of blood formed a strange, new perfume of war. He could feel the eyes of the squad on him. They were no longer mocking. They were wide, uncertain, almost wary. He had ceased to be Miller the Okie, and had become something else entirely, an unknown quantity, a sudden and violent force of nature. Sergeant Dalton approached, his boots sinking into the mud with a sucking sound. He squatted in front of Samuel, his expression grim. He didn't speak for a long moment, just watched the precise, economical movements of the rod going in and out of the barrel. "Regulation says a sniper's primary role is observation," Dalton began, his voice low. "Intelligence gathering." He paused, picking up a fallen leaf and turning it over in his fingers. Regulation wasn't written for this green hell. He looked Samuel directly in the eye. "That was no lucky shot, son. And that second sniper, he wasn't there for the squad. He was there for you." Samuel stopped his work, his hands still. He nodded once. He had known it the moment the mud spattered his face. "Battalion command is screaming," Dalton continued. "We're losing NCOs, radio men, machine gunners. Picked off by ghosts. They're stalling our entire push up this ridge." He gestured vaguely toward the impenetrable wall of jungle ahead. "I'm giving you a new assignment, Miller. Effective immediately. Your primary and only mission is to hunt. You are to systematically find and eliminate every Japanese sniper operating in this company's zone of advance." He let the weight of the order hang in the humid air. It was an impossible task. To find a handful of invisible men in 1,000 square miles of tangled, hostile wilderness. "You have 96 hours, Dalton said, his voice dropping even lower. "The big push starts then. We need this ridge cleared." He looked over at Petrelli, who was nervously checking the action of his garand. "Petrelli, you're his spotter. You do what he says. You keep him alive. His rifle is now the most important weapon in this platoon. You understand." Petrelli's face was a mixture of resentment and awe. He nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah, Sarge. I got it." The hunt began that afternoon. Samuel and Petrelli moved ahead of the main company, ghosts themselves in the dappled light. Samuel was in his element. He moved not like a soldier, but like a hunter, his steps silent and deliberate, his eyes constantly scanning, reading the jungle like a book. He pointed out signs Petrelli would have missed, a broken fern stem, the subtle difference in color of a disturbed patch of moss, a single strand of burlap caught on a thorn. See the lack of birdsong in that sector? Samuel whispered, pointing to a dense thicket. Something's in there. Something that doesn't belong. They set up in a concealed position overlooking a likely approach. Samuel became a statue again. An hour passed. Petrelli fidgeted, swatting at insects, the inactivity gnawing at him. Samuel didn't move. Then he saw it. A flicker of movement, 150 yards out. A Japanese soldier, expertly using the terrain, moving from one covered position to another. He wasn't a sniper, he was a scout. Samuel's voice was a breath. Wind. 2 o'clock. 5 miles per. He didn't wait for confirmation. The crosshairs found the man's center mass. The shot was a clean, surgical crack. The scout crumpled without a sound. 1, Samuel said, the word flat and empty. Before Petrelli could respond, Samuel was already tracking a new movement. The shot had flushed another target, a sniper, repositioning in a tree to their left. Samuel cycled the bolt, the spent cartridge flying. He fired again, faster this time. The figure in the tree jerked and went still. 2. Petrelli just stared, his binoculars trembling in his hands. In under 10 seconds, Samuel had done what the entire company had failed to do all morning. He had turned the jungle from a place of fear into a shooting gallery. As dusk began to bleed the color from the world, they moved to rejoin the company lines. It was then they found them. A 2-man American sniper team from Fox Company. They were lashed to trees, their throats cut. Their M1D sniper rifles were gone. Pinned to one man's chest with a bayonet was a small, blood-smeared piece of paper. On it, crudely drawn in charcoal, was the image of a single eye. They weren't just hiding. They were hunting him back. And they had just issued their challenge. Dawn of the third day broke not with light, but with a pale, spectral mist that clung to the jungle, reducing the world to a monochrome of grays and greens. Samuel felt the exhaustion in his bones, a deep, grinding fatigue that coffee and cold rations couldn't touch. It was a weariness of the spirit as much as the body. The count was now 14. 14 invisible men made visible only in the moment of their death. Each shot was a surgical procedure, draining a little more of his humanity. He operated on a razor's edge, his senses stretched to their breaking point, every nerve screaming that he was being watched. Petrelli, hunched beside him in a shallow foxhole they'd scraped into the side of a ridge, was a changed man. The brashness was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed vigilance. He handed Samuel a canteen without a word. The water tasted of metal and the lingering fear from the night. "He's out there, isn't he?" Petrelli whispered, his voice raspy. "The one who left the message." Samuel just nodded, his eyes never leaving the mist-shrouded gorge that separated their position from the next ridge, the Japanese main line of resistance. He didn't need a name for the enemy sniper. In his mind, he was the ghost. He was the one who moved without sound, whose shots seemed to come from nowhere, who had killed the Fox Company team not just to send a message, but to eliminate competition. He was the master, and Samuel had encroached on his territory. It was Petrelli who spotted the anomaly. Miller, 10 o'clock. On the opposite ridge. That cluster of banyans. See the one with the vine hanging like a curtain? There's a knot in the trunk. It's too symmetrical. Samuel shifted the unertal scope. He saw it. A dark, circular shape that mimicked a knot but was a fraction too dark, too perfect. It was the muzzle of an Arisaka Type 97 sniper rifle, expertly concealed. The ghost. He had found his lair. The distance was immense, over 500 yards, with the mist shifting unpredictably between them. An impossible shot. 4 hours, they watched. The ghost was a patient predator. He never fired. He was waiting. For what, Samuel didn't know. But the presence was a tangible thing, a pressure across the gorge. Samuel knew a direct duel was suicide. The ghost held the superior position. He needed to be clever. He needed to use the jungle itself. His eyes traced a line from his position to the ghost's. A thick, leafy philodendron bush stood directly in the line of fire. An idea, born of desperation and a deep understanding of ballistics, formed in his mind. "Petrelli," Samuel murmured, his voice barely audible. "I'm going to make a hole." "A hole? What are you talking about?" Samuel didn't answer. He adjusted the elevation turret on his scope, calculating a steeply arcing trajectory. He wasn't aiming at the ghost. He was aiming at the dense center of the philodendron bush. He took a breath, let it out, and fired. The .30-06 round tore through the foliage, shredding leaves and branches. Through the scope, Samuel saw a clean, round hole punched through the greenery. "What the hell was that?" Petrelli hissed. "You just gave away our position." "He'll think it was a miss." "A scared, inexperienced shot," Samuel said, his voice icy calm. He cycled the bolt, the hot, spent casing bouncing off the log in front of them. "Now he has a new sight line. A perfect one. He'll think it's a gift." He was right. A minute later, the dark muzzle in the distant tree shifted almost imperceptibly. It was now centered on the newly created hole in the bush. The ghost was taking the bait, aligning his rifle to fire through the very channel Samuel had created. But Samuel had anticipated this. He had fired at an angle. The hole he created was not a straight tunnel to their position. It was a diagonal. The ghost's line of sight was now aimed at empty jungle 10 feet to their left. And in shifting his rifle, the ghost had exposed 3 inches of his shoulder and the side of his face. It was all Samuel needed. He had already pre-adjusted his scope back to a flat trajectory. He swung the rifle, the crosshairs floating across the gorge, finding the sliver of exposed flesh and cloth. The wind was a problem, the mist a complication. It was the hardest shot of his life. He fired. The crack of the rifle was swallowed by the gorge. Through the scope, he saw a spray of crimson mist bloom from the ghost's position. The symmetrical dark circle of the muzzle vanished. There was a strangled cry, cut short, and then the sound of frantic scrambling from the distant tree. He hadn't killed him. But he had drawn blood. He had wounded the master. A grim satisfaction warred with the cold dread in his gut. He had won the duel. But that night, as a deep, moonless blackness fell over the island, the war changed shape again. The Japanese launched a concentrated infiltration attack on their section of the line. Grenades were thrown. The night erupted with the staccato bark of Thompson submachine guns and the guttural shouts of close-quarters combat. Samuel and Petrelli fought back-to-back in their foxhole, using their pistols in the chaotic dark. When it was over, 3 Japanese soldiers lay dead within 10 yards of their position. They hadn't been carrying standard infantry gear. Their packs were light, filled with extra ammunition, rations, and detailed sketches of the American positions. One had an officer's katana tucked into his pack. They weren't a random probe. They were hunters. And their specific target had been the American sniper's nest. Samuel looked at the dead infiltrators, then out into the black jungle. The ghost had escaped, and he had sent his hounds. Samuel was no longer just the hunter. He was the prized quarry, and the entire jungle was now his enemy. The ridge was a slaughterhouse. The advance had ground to a bloody, complete halt. From his dominating position high in a monstrous ironwood tree, the ghost had them pinned. He was no longer a sniper. He was a gatekeeper. Every attempt to flank him had been met with a single, perfectly placed round that dropped a man in his tracks. A machine gun team from 2nd Platoon had been wiped out before they could even set the tripod of their M1919 Browning. The company medic, a brave kid from Iowa named Collins, now lay dead in the open, a red stain blooming across his chest where he'd been shot through the heart while trying to drag a wounded man to safety. The sound was the worst part. Not the sporadic American return fire, but the absence of the ghost's rifle. The silence between shots was a psychological torture, a drawn-out moment of dread waiting for the next crack that would inevitably claim another life. He was conserving ammunition, making every shot count. Samuel and Petrelli Belli crawled their way to the forward command post, a shallow depression behind a fallen log where Sergeant Dalton was crouched over a map, his face a mask of grim futility. The air crackled with the desperate, static-filled reports coming over the SCR 536 handy-talkie. Can't move, 6. We're pinned down. He's got every approach zeroed. We've got 3 more down, over. Dalton keyed the microphone, his knuckles white. Hold your position, Baker 2. Do not expose yourselves. Out. He looked up at Samuel, his eyes haunted. He's picked us apart, Miller. He's got the high ground, perfect cover, and he's a goddamn artist with that rifle. We can't go over, we can't go around. We're stuck. Samuel didn't need the explanation. He'd been studying the position for 10 minutes through his binoculars. The ghost was over 600 yards away, perched in a near-impenetrable nest of vines and branches. The shot was a nightmare. It was steeply uphill. The heat haze was already beginning to shimmer, distorting the sight picture. A capricious, swirling wind danced through the gorge below, and the ghost was visible only as a sliver of darkness, a sliver that occasionally blotted out a tiny, specific patch of green. I need a firing solution, Samuel said, his voice low and steady. Petrelli. Petrelli, lying beside him, had the spotting scope pressed to his eye. His voice trembled. Range, 620, maybe 630 yards. Wind. Jesus, Miller, it's all over the place. Left to right at 5? Now it's nothing. Now it's right to left at 3. It's a damn swirl. Samuel nodded, his mind working, calculating. He unslung the M1903, the mail-order rifle. The mockery felt a lifetime away. Now, it was the only tool that could possibly do this. He nestled the stock into his shoulder, the familiar grain of the wood a comfort against his cheek. He peered through the unertal scope. The world vanished, replaced by a shimmering, wavy image of the distant tree. The ghost was a phantom behind a veil of heat and leaves. He took a deep breath, trying to slow his racing heart. The wind ain't your enemy. It's your teacher. His grandfather's voice, clear as day, cut through the fear. He wasn't just shooting a rifle. He was having a conversation with the elements. He began to make tiny, subconscious adjustments. He didn't just aim, he felt the shot. He felt the humid air resisting the bullet, the gravity pulling it down on its long, arcing journey, the chaotic wind trying to slap it off course. He adjusted the elevation knob, dialing in an immense amount of holdover, aiming what felt like a football field above the target. Wind, Petrelli whispered, his voice tight. Hold. Hold 2 mils right. Now it's dropping. 1 mil left. Wait, it's shifting again. The crosshairs danced and swam. Samuel's finger rested on the trigger. The pressure was a physical weight, crushing him. The lives of every man on this ridge, the success of the entire push, depended on this one, impossible shot from a mail-order rifle. He saw the faces of the dead medics, the machine gunners. He saw the mocking smiles of his squad mates from the ship. He saw the red dust of Oklahoma. He blocked it all out. There was no past, no future, no war, no fear. There was only the whisper of the wind, the rhythm of his own heart, the crosshair, and the tiny, dark sliver in the tree. The swirls of heat and wind seemed to coalesce for a single, perfect second. A momentary truce in the chaos of physics. His finger completed the squeeze. Crack. The report was deafening in the tense silence. The recoil punched his shoulder, a familiar, solid jolt. Time stopped. The shot echoed across the ridge, then faded, swallowed by the jungle. For 1, 2, 3 heartbeats, there was nothing. No return fire. No cry. Just the terrible, silent question hanging in the air. Then, a sound. Faint, but unmistakable. A distant, metallic clatter tap-tap-tap as a rifle, falling from a great height, bounced off branches and landed on the jungle floor. A collective, held breath was released across the entire American line. Samuel didn't move. He stayed locked on the spot, his eyes still glued to the scope, his body rigid. Waiting. Watching. The ghost's position was still. The sliver of darkness was gone. The silence was the first thing he noticed. It was a heavy, profound quiet, broken only by the drip of water from leaves and the low, pained moans of the wounded. The relentless, psychic pressure of the ghost's rifle was gone, leaving a void in the air. For a long minute, no one moved. No one fired. The ridge, once a killing field, was now just a strip of scarred earth and broken trees. Then, slowly, like men emerging from a bomb shelter, the American soldiers began to rise. They advanced up the ridge, their movements cautious, almost reverent, as if expecting the death-dealing shot to come even from beyond the grave. It did not. Samuel finally lowered his eye from the scope. The image of the distant tree was burned into his retina. He worked the bolt of his Springfield, ejecting the spent casing that had sealed the ghost's fate. The smell of the single round, cordite, brass, and oil, was sharp in his nostrils. He placed the warm, empty rifle on the ground beside him. His hands were steady, but a deep, uncontrollable tremor had taken root in his soul. Petrelli was the first to speak. He didn't look at Samuel, just stared out at the now secure ridge. Without a word, he unscrewed the cap from his canteen and held it out. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. It was an apology, a thank you, an acknowledgment of a debt that could never be repaid. Samuel took it and drank. The water was warm and tasted of tin, but it was the purest thing he had ever tasted. Sergeant Dalton moved up beside them, his face etched with a weary gratitude. He keyed his handy-talkie. Baker actual to all elements. The ridge is secure. Advance and consolidate. He lowered the radio and looked at Samuel, his eyes doing a quick, professional assessment of the man who was now more weapon than soldier. Confirmed the kill, Dalton said, his voice low and rough. Found his position. You hit him square in the scope. The round traveled right through the optics and into his eye. He never knew what hit him. He paused, letting the horrific precision of it sink in. Command's been keeping a tally, Miller. Based on radio intercepts, casualty reports, and our own confirmed kills. The count is 20. 20 snipers in 96 hours. The number hung in the air, meaningless and immense. 20. It wasn't a score. It was a weight. It was 20 lives extinguished, 20 triggers he had pulled, 20 moments of violent, final silence. He felt no pride. Only a hollow, cavernous emptiness. The company secured the position. Medics moved through the ranks, tending to the wounded with a grim efficiency. The dead were collected, laid in a somber row, and covered with ponchos. Their boots looked so vulnerable, sticking out from under the green plastic. Samuel saw the face of the young medic, Collins, pale and waxy in death. He saw the machine gunners, their bodies arranged where they had fallen. His actions had saved the company, but they had not saved everyone. The cost was written in the lines of dirt and blood on the faces of the living. The mockery on the troop ship felt like a memory from another man's life. The mail-order rifle lay beside him, its barrel cool, its job done. It was no longer an object of ridicule, but a tool of grim necessity, an instrument that had spoken with a terrible, singular clarity when chaos demanded it. He sat on an abandoned ammunition crate, a solitary figure amidst the organized activity of the victorious. He pulled a small oil-stained rag from his pocket and began, once more, to clean the rifle. It was a ritual of purification, an attempt to wipe away not just the grime of battle, but the psychic residue of the last 4 days. The carbon ring in the chamber. The faint smell of death that seemed to have seeped into the wood. He hadn't won a war. He had simply held a line. He had kept a promise he'd made to himself in the Oklahoma dust, a promise of precision, of efficiency, of a single well-placed shot. He had done his duty. But as he looked down at the clean, lethal lines of the Springfield, he knew the echo of those 20 shots would ring in the silence of his mind for the rest of his life. He looked at the cleaned rifle, no longer a piece of mail-order nonsense, but a quiet, deadly promise kept, an instrument that had spoken 20 times, and in doing so, had saved countless brothers from a silent death. This is the story of the Oklahoma Ghost, a quiet man with a mail-order rifle who became a legend in the hell of Bougainville. These are the stories of sacrifice and incredible courage that defined a generation. If you believe these stories deserve to be remembered, honor his legacy by subscribing and turning on notifications. We are their voice, and we will never forget.